My name is Naomi Carter. I was 24 years old the night my parents handed my bedroom to out-of-town guests, made me sleep on the floor like I was some inconvenient extra in my own home, and then spent the next morning telling relatives I was ungrateful because I had the nerve to look hurt. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there, because I swear family humiliation always seems to happen at the exact moment people know it will leave the deepest scar. The worst part was not even the floor. It was hearing my mother laugh downstairs while people I barely knew settled into my room, opened my closet, used my bathroom, and laid their suitcases across the bed I had slept in since I was 13, as if my existence had been temporarily cleared away for more important people. That night started with my mother banging on my bedroom door without waiting for me to answer. "Naomi, open up." I was sitting on my bed folding laundry after work. I had just come home from an 8-hour shift at a dental office. My feet ached, and all I wanted was a shower and sleep. I opened the door and found my mother already irritated, already acting like I had done something wrong without even speaking. "Your Aunt Denise and Uncle Rob are taking this room," she said. At first I thought she meant for a few hours so they could put their bags down. I actually smiled a little and said, "Okay, I'll move my stuff so they have space." She looked at me like I was being slow on purpose. "No, they're sleeping here. For the weekend." I remember staring at her, waiting for the part where she said she was joking. Behind her, I could hear my father dragging luggage down the hall. Then I saw it. My bedroom door was already propped wider open, and my father was carrying in one of the guest suitcases like the decision had been made before I was even informed. I said, very quietly, "Where am I supposed to sleep?" My mother crossed her arms. "In the den. On the floor. It's only 2 nights. Naomi, stop making everything dramatic." I still remember how hot my face felt. Not because I had yelled. I had not. Not because I had refused. I had not. Just because I realized, in one cold, humiliating second, that they had discussed this, agreed to it, and never once considered that I might be a person with dignity. "The floor?" I asked. "You're serious?" My father finally looked at me then, but not with concern, with annoyance. "We have guests," he said. "Try acting grateful for once." That word hit me harder than anything else. Grateful, as if I should be thankful to be displaced inside the house I helped maintain. Thankful after years of being the daughter who cleaned up before relatives came over, who gave up weekends to help my mother host, who smiled through comments about how easy I had it while I worked, paid for my own gas, bought my own toiletries, and learned very young that in our family, comfort belonged to whoever made my parents look generous. I watched my aunt walk in behind them with that polite little smile people wear when they know something is awkward, but don't want to be the one to say it. "Oh, honey, we don't want to put you out," she said, already setting her purse on my dresser. My dresser, my room, my bed, and my mother, without a second of shame, said, "She's fine. Naomi gets moody when things aren't about her." That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough for me to understand that whatever pain I showed would be turned into evidence against me. So I didn't cry in front of them. I picked up my pillow, my blanket, and the charger from beside my bed, while my father moved my laundry basket into the hallway like I was being evicted from a space I had never had the right to claim. My mother told me not to leave my things lying around because she didn't want the guests to feel crowded. Then she asked me to help bring up extra towels. I actually stood there for a second, holding my blanket in my arms, thinking, "You made me homeless in my own house and still expected me to help you play hostess." That night, I lay on a thin comforter in the den, my back pressed against hardwood floors that never stopped feeling hard no matter how I shifted. Every sound traveled through the house. Laughter from the kitchen, ice clinking in glasses, my mother telling someone, in that bright, fake voice she used when company was over. Naomi's been so difficult lately. We do everything for her, and she still complains. I pressed my face into the pillow because I knew if I went downstairs, they would say I was proving their point. And somewhere above me, in the room that was supposed to be mine, strangers slept peacefully while I stared into the dark and understood something I had spent years trying not to admit. I was not being asked to be loving. I was being trained to accept humiliation and call it gratitude. The thing that made that night stay with me for years was not just the humiliation of sleeping on the floor while strangers slept in my bed. It was the fact that it fit too perfectly into a pattern I had spent most of my life trying to explain away. That was the lie I had told myself for years. That every cruel thing had context, that every humiliation had a reason, that every time my parents crossed a line, it was because they were stressed, or tired, or trying their best, or worried about money, or trying to impress relatives, or simply from a different generation that did not know how to be gentle. I kept trying to make their behavior understandable because the truth was harder to sit with. The truth was that I had always been the one expected to give things up. I was the one who gave up privacy first, comfort first, peace first. If something had to be sacrificed for the family to look good, it was usually me. When I was 12, my mother gave away a winter coat I loved to one of my cousins because she needed it more, even though it was the only good coat I had. When I cried because it was mine, and because I knew I would be cold walking to school, my mother looked disgusted and told me I was acting spoiled. She said, "You should be proud to help family." Then she went on the phone that same afternoon and told my aunt how generous I had been, as if my pain counted as charity she could claim. When I was 15, my father volunteered me to give up my weekend plans and help clean before one of his church friends visited from out of town. I had been looking forward to that Saturday for weeks because a friend had invited me to her birthday dinner, and I almost never asked for anything. But my father told me family responsibilities came first. He said a good daughter understood that. Then when I looked disappointed, he told me I needed to work on my attitude. That was always how it happened. They would take something from me and then demand a pleasant expression while they did it. If I showed hurt, I was difficult. If I protested, I was disrespectful. If I went quiet, I was moody. And if I ever tried to describe the pattern out loud, they would act like I was imagining it. My brother, Caleb, never seemed to notice any of this because none of it ever happened to him. He was 2 years older than me, loud when he wanted something, careless with his mess, late with apologies, and somehow always protected by the simple fact that he was just being himself. My mistakes became character flaws. His mistakes became funny stories. If guests came over, no one offered up his room. If family needed help, no one automatically rearranged his life. He was allowed to be comfortable in a way I never was. I learned early that there was a role assigned to me in that house. I was the accommodating one, the understanding one, the easy one. The daughter who was supposed to smooth everything over so no one else had to feel bad about what they were doing. That was why the bedroom incident cut so deep. It was not just about a bed. It was about the message underneath it. The one I had been receiving for years in 100 different forms. You matter less here, less than guests, less than appearances, less than your parents' reputation, less than everyone's comfort except your own. The next morning, I woke up with a stiff neck, sore shoulders, and that dull, miserable heaviness that comes after a night when your body never really rests. Sunlight was already pushing through the den curtains. I could hear movement in the kitchen and smell coffee. For one foolish second, I thought maybe one of my parents would come in, see me on the floor, and finally understand how wrong it all was. Instead, I heard my mother's voice floating in from the dining room. She was upset over something so small, she said, and then laughed softly, like I was an exhausting little problem she had learned to manage. You know how Naomi is. We try so hard with her, but she always finds a reason to be offended. I stayed still. I do not know why that hurt more than being forced out of my room. Maybe because the humiliation had not even been enough for her. She also needed to control the story. It was not sufficient that I had been pushed aside. I also had to be painted as unreasonable, because that was how she protected herself from ever having to feel guilty. A little later, I walked into the kitchen and found my Aunt Denise at the table with a mug in her hand. She gave me one of those careful smiles adults give when they know something is wrong, but have already decided not to get involved. She tilted her head and said, "You should cut your parents some slack. Honey, they do a lot for you. Some girls would be grateful to even have a place to stay." That sentence went through me like cold water. A place to stay. Not a home, not my room, not even my parents' responsibility. Just a place to stay. As if I were some ungrateful boarder instead of their daughter. As if being allowed to exist under their roof meant I had surrendered the right to basic respect. I looked at her, then at my mother, who was standing at the counter pretending not to listen, while very clearly waiting to see whether I would defend myself and give her another reason to call me difficult. And in that moment, I understood something with a clarity that almost frightened me. This was never about one weekend, never about one room, never about one rude decision. This was the family system. This was how they kept me small. They would take from me, rewrite the story, and then demand gratitude for the privilege of being mistreated. I poured myself a cup of coffee with shaking hands and said nothing, because if I opened my mouth too soon, all my years of swallowed anger were going to come out at once. But something in me had shifted. For the first time, I stopped trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. I was not overreacting. I was finally reacting to something that had been happening for years. By the time my aunt and uncle left, the room was mine again, at least physically. My sheets were wrinkled by other people's bodies. My dresser drawers had been opened. My hair products had been moved around in the bathroom, and one of my books had come back with a bent cover, like even my belongings had been reminded they were not important enough to be handled with care. But what stayed behind after that weekend was worse than the mess. It was the story my parents told about me. At first it spread quietly, in the way family lies usually do. A phone call here, a casual comment there. My mother was very skilled at that kind of thing. She never started with, "I treated my daughter unfairly." She started with a sigh, a tired voice, a wounded tone that invited sympathy before facts ever entered the room. "We had family visiting," she would say, and Naomi made such a scene over giving up her room for 2 nights. That was how it got framed, not as my parents pushing me onto the floor without asking, not as my privacy being erased to impress guests, not as one more example of a long pattern. Just me, supposedly throwing a fit because I was selfish. Then my father added his version, which somehow made it worse. "She's at that age where she thinks the world should revolve around her." He told one of my uncles on the phone while I was close enough to hear every word. "We're trying to teach her gratitude, but she takes everything personally." I remember standing in the hallway with a basket of clean laundry in my arms, frozen in place, because there was something so chilling about hearing your own parent narrate you like a problem to be managed instead of a daughter to be understood. That week, the messages started. One cousin texted me, "Your parents were just trying to host family. You could have been more mature about it." Another wrote, "I know it's hard living with parents as an adult, but you should respect their house rules." That one almost made me laugh, except I felt too hollow to laugh at anything. House rules. As if basic dignity had somehow become a rule I was wrong to expect. Then came my grandmother's call. She did not ask me what happened. She did not ask whether I was okay. She simply said, "Your mother is hurt." She told me you embarrassed her in front of guests. I sat on the edge of my bed while she spoke, staring at the very room I had been thrown out of days earlier. And I felt this terrible split inside me. One part of me wanted to scream. The other part of me was still that little girl who had spent years trying to earn fairness by being calm, reasonable, and easy to forgive. So I said, "Grandma, they made me sleep on the floor." There was a pause. Then she gave the answer I would hear in different versions from half the family. It was only for 2 nights. Naomi, sometimes peace matters more than pride. Peace. That word followed girls like me everywhere. Not justice, not honesty, not respect. Peace. Which always seemed to mean silence when someone stronger was doing something cruel. I started noticing the looks at family events after that. The little shifts in tone, the way conversations changed when I entered a room. No one openly attacked me to my face, at least not at first. But I could feel the judgment sitting under everything. I had been rebranded. I was no longer the dependable daughter who helped with errands and smiled through discomfort. I was now the sensitive one, the difficult one, the one who made things awkward. My mother leaned into that version of me with almost frightening confidence. One evening, while she was chopping vegetables for dinner, she said, without looking at me, "You really need to learn not to make everything about yourself. The family is starting to notice." I turned from the sink and looked at her. "The family is noticing what you told them." That was the first time I had spoken back that directly in a long while. Her knife stopped for just a second. Then she said, still calm, still controlled, "So now I'm a liar?" I should have known better than to answer that question honestly, because in our house, truth was dangerous if it pointed upward. But I was tired in that deep way that had nothing to do with sleep. "You told them I made a scene," I said. "You didn't tell them you gave my room away and made me sleep on the floor." She finally turned to face me then, and the expression on her face was not guilt. It was offense. Real offense. As if she could not believe I was still holding her accountable for something she had already decided was over. "We were hosting family," she snapped. "You act like we abused you." The word hung there. Abused. It was always like this. Either I accepted whatever happened without protest, or they accused me of exaggerating. They took every wound and turned it into a flaw in my character. Before I could answer, my father walked in and looked between us with immediate irritation, not curiosity. He did not ask what had happened. He asked, "What's going on now?" My mother beat me to it. "She's still upset about the room," she said, with a laugh that made me feel sick. "Apparently we ruined her life." "I never said that," I said. My father rubbed his forehead like I was the source of household chaos. "Naomi, enough. You owe your mother an apology. This family has bent over backward for you." That sentence landed so hard because it was the exact opposite of the truth. I had bent over backward for that family for years. I had adjusted, swallowed, excused, softened, and made myself smaller every time they asked. But in their version of reality, my pain erased their comfort, and their comfort erased my pain. He kept going. "You embarrassed us. Relatives are calling. Your grandmother is upset. You need to let this go." Something inside me went very still then. Not healed, not calm, just still. Because I finally understood the trap. If I apologized, I would be confirming their story. If I stayed and kept arguing, they would keep calling me unstable. And if I kept hoping someone in that house would suddenly care about the truth, I was going to spend the rest of my 20s begging for basic decency from people who benefited from denying me exactly that. So for the first time, I said the one thing they never expected from me. "No." My father frowned. "No what?" "No. I'm not apologizing for being humiliated." The whole kitchen went silent. My mother stared at me like I had slapped her. My father's face hardened, and I stood there with my heart pounding so hard it almost hurt. knowing I had just crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. That night, in the privacy of the same room they had once decided I did not deserve, I opened my laptop and started looking at room rentals. Cheap apartments, anything at all. I was not planning some dramatic escape. I was planning survival. Because if they were determined to keep rewriting my life, then I needed to get out before I forgot what the truth actually was. I did not leave in some dramatic burst of shouting. There was no slammed door, no final speech in the driveway, no moment where my parents suddenly saw the pain on my face and understood what they had done. People like them rarely give you a clean ending. They prefer to keep hurting you in small, deniable ways, then act shocked when you finally disappear. I left quietly, because by then I had learned that quiet decisions can still change your whole life. For 2 weeks, I searched for anything I could afford. My dental office job did not pay much, and I had not saved nearly as much as I should have because living at home had always come with hidden costs. My parents were the kind of people who would tell others I had it easy under their roof, but still expected me to cover groceries sometimes, pay for my own essentials, run errands, and contribute whenever it helped them feel less burdened. I had been helping more than anyone in the family ever admitted. I found a room in a small duplex across town, rented by a woman in her 50s named Carla. The place was not pretty. The carpet was old. The kitchen was narrow, and the window in the bedroom stuck unless you pushed it hard with both hands. But when I stood in that little room and looked at the twin bed against the wall, I felt something so strong I had to blink fast to keep from crying. It was not even a nice bed, but it was mine. No one was going to volunteer it to guests. No one was going to open the door without knocking. No one was going to tell me I should be grateful for sleeping on the floor while they used my comfort to impress other people. I signed the lease 3 days later. I packed while my parents were out one Saturday afternoon, not because I was afraid they would stop me physically, but because I knew they would try to do something worse. They would minimize it, mock it, turn it into one more example of me being emotional and selfish. I did not have the strength for that. So I folded my clothes, boxed up my books, took the framed photo of me and my best friend from high school, grabbed my work shoes, my old laptop, my chargers, and the few things in that room that actually felt like they belonged to me. Every item I touched seemed to carry a memory of some compromise I had made in that house, some silence I had swallowed, some moment I had told myself, just get through this and keep the peace. When my mother came home and saw the boxes near the front door, she did not look heartbroken. She looked offended. "What is all this?" she asked. I kept taping one of the boxes shut. "I'm moving out." My father had walked in behind her by then, and the look on his face was almost insulting in its disbelief. Not because he was worried about me, because he seemed genuinely stunned that I would dare act on my own pain instead of just continuing to absorb it. My mother gave a short, dry laugh. "You are really doing all this over that room?" That sentence told me everything. Even then, even with my belongings packed and my decision made, she still needed the story to stay small. She still needed it to sound like I was unstable, impulsive, dramatic. I looked at her and said, as evenly as I could, "I'm not leaving because of one room. I'm leaving because this house has never felt like home to me." For the first time in that whole conversation, she seemed thrown, only for a second. Then she snapped, "After everything we've done for you?" There it was again, the line they used every time they wanted gratitude to cancel out cruelty. I almost answered. I almost listed every time I had swallowed hurt to make their lives easier, every time I had been told to give something up, smile, and call it love. Every time they had needed a daughter who would take the humiliation quietly so they could keep their image intact. But I did not. Because I had finally realized something important. People who build their power on rewriting your pain will never be persuaded by the truth while they still benefit from denying it. So I just said, "I'm not discussing it anymore." My father's voice turned cold. "If you walk out like this, don't expect us to come chasing after you." It was supposed to scare me. Instead, it made me feel strangely calm. Because for years, I had been the one chasing them, chasing fairness, chasing acknowledgement, chasing some tiny scrap of proof that I mattered to them as much as their pride did. And the exhaustion of that had almost hollowed me out. "I'm not asking you to," I said. I carried my boxes to my car in 3 trips. My mother stood in the doorway like a witness collecting evidence for the version of the story she would later tell. My father stayed behind her, stiff and silent, as if he had already decided I was betraying the family by refusing to keep playing my assigned role inside it. No one helped me. That hurt, even though I should have expected it. There is something brutal about realizing your parents can watch you leave with everything you own in cardboard boxes and still be more focused on their wounded pride than your trembling hands. The first night in the duplex, I sat on that narrow twin bed and ate takeout noodles from the carton because I had not unpacked my dishes yet. The room smelled faintly like dust and detergent. The lamp by the bed leaned a little to one side. Cars passed outside every now and then. It should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt quiet in a way I had never known. No one was mocking me downstairs. No one was telling relatives a story about my attitude. No one was opening my door. No one was asking me to disappear so somebody else could feel comfortable. I lay back on that small mattress and stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in years, I did not feel like an intruder in my own life. The weeks that followed were hard. I worked full days at the office, picked up extra hours when I could, and learned how expensive peace can be when you have had to buy it for yourself. I budgeted everything. I skipped little luxuries without thinking twice. There were nights I sat on the edge of my bed doing the math over and over, wondering whether I had made a reckless decision. Then I would remember the hardwood floor in the den, my mother laughing, my father calling me ungrateful, the sound of strangers settling into my room, and every time, the answer came back the same. No, leaving had not been reckless. Staying had been. My parents called twice in those first few weeks. Not to apologize. Not to ask whether I was safe. Not to admit they had pushed me too far. The first call was from my mother, who said, "Are you done punishing us yet?" The second was from my father, who said, "You made your point. You can come home now. Come home," as if home were a place where people made room for you instead of pushing you out of it. I did not go back. And somewhere between the aching budget, the long workdays, and the tiny room with the stubborn window, I started becoming someone my parents had never planned for. Someone who could survive without their permission. Someone who no longer needed their version of the story to live. Someone who had finally chosen dignity over belonging. 5 years passed before my parents spoke to me like I mattered again. Not loved, not missed, not understood, mattered. There is a difference. And if you grow up in the kind of family I did, you learn it the hard way. By then, I was 29 and living in a 1-bedroom apartment I had worked myself nearly sick to afford. It was not luxurious, but every inch of it felt earned. The couch in the living room had come from a clearance sale. My kitchen table was secondhand. I had built my life piece by piece, paycheck by paycheck, with no family help and no safety net except the one I forced myself to become. I had also built something else in those 5 years. A reputation. I was no longer the shaken girl who slept on hardwood floors and cried into a borrowed pillow. I had moved up at work, taken certification courses on weekends, and eventually become office manager at the dental practice where I had once been the youngest employee. I handled scheduling, billing disputes, payroll coordination, patient complaints, vendor contracts, and all the emergencies no one else wanted to touch. I had become the person people called when something was falling apart and needed to be made functional again. Maybe that was why what happened next felt so bitterly familiar. Because once again, my family did not think of me when things were easy. They thought of me when something needed saving. It started with a text from my brother Caleb. I had not heard from him in almost a year. And even then, it had only been a lazy birthday message sent at 11:42 p.m. that looked copied and pasted from obligation. But one Tuesday evening, while I was reheating soup after work, my phone lit up with his name. "Hey, Mom and Dad could really use your help." I stared at it for a long time before answering. "With what?" His reply came fast, too fast, like he had been waiting. "Dad's been out of work for months. They're behind on the mortgage. Mom's freaking out. They might lose the house." I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. The house. That house. The one where I had learned how invisible I was. The one where I had been told to sleep on the floor so guests could enjoy my room. The one where my pain had always been treated like an inconvenience, and my silence like proof of maturity. I should tell you something important here. I had not spent those 5 years fantasizing about revenge. I was not sitting around waiting for disaster to hit them so I could enjoy their suffering. I had spent those years trying to become someone whose life was not still controlled by what happened in that house. But healing does not erase memory, and seeing the words "they might lose the house" did something strange to me. Not joy, not triumph, just a deep, disorienting ache. Because no matter how much distance I had built, there is a kind of grief that never fully leaves you when the people who first taught you what home meant are also the ones who made it unsafe. I asked Caleb what happened. His answer was exactly what I should have expected. A messy combination of bad decisions, pride, and denial. My father had refused to take a lower-paying job after being laid off because he thought something better would come along. My mother had continued spending like appearances still mattered more than numbers. There had been credit cards. There had been late notices. There had been borrowed money from relatives, most of whom had finally stopped answering their calls. Caleb, who had always been treated as the golden child, had apparently helped where he could. Which, judging by the tone of his messages, meant not very much. Then came the part that made me laugh once. Without humor. "Mom says you're good with this kind of stuff." That was all. No acknowledgement of the years they had spent turning me into the family scapegoat. No mention of the lies. No apology. Just that. I was good with this kind of stuff. As if competence had replaced daughterhood. As if usefulness was close enough to love that no one needed to say the difference out loud. I did not answer for a while. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. For a second I just stared at the screen, my chest tightening in that old, involuntary way. It amazed me how the body remembers what the mind has spent years trying to file away. I could be sitting in my own apartment, paying my own bills, wearing clothes I bought with my own paycheck, and still one call from her could bring back the feeling of being 19. Cornered in a kitchen, told that my hurt was arrogance. I picked up on the fourth ring. Her voice came through brittle and overly bright, like she had dressed her desperation in politeness and hoped I would not notice. "Naomi." I waited. Then she said, "I didn't know if you'd answer." It was the closest thing to humility I had ever heard from her. "What do you need?" I asked. Not hello. Not how have you been? Just the truth. There was a pause on the line, and then she exhaled sharply, as if even now she resented having to say it. "We're in a difficult position." That was how she described it. Not ruin, not crisis, not years of financial denial catching up with them. A difficult position. I said nothing. She kept going. "Your father has had some setbacks. The mortgage is behind. We've been trying to work something out. But everything is just complicated right now." There it was again. The family language I knew too well. Everything softened when it was their pain. Everything got delicate words and patient framing when they were the ones in trouble. But when it had been me, sleeping on a floor while strangers used my room, that had been called drama. And, I said, I could hear how flat my voice sounded. And I think she could too. And Caleb said you've done well for yourself, she said carefully. He said you're very organized, good with paperwork. We were hoping maybe you could look at some things. Help us figure out what options we have. Help us. The words might have sounded ordinary to anyone else, but to me, they landed like a whole history collapsing inward. Because this was what I had always been to them when things got hard. Not cherished, not protected, useful. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my apartment. At the stack of unopened mail on the counter that belonged only to me, at the framed print on my wall, at the lamp I bought after saving for 3 months because I wanted something warm in the corner by the couch. Every object around me was a quiet reminder that I had built a life without them. And now, after all those years, they were reaching into that life because they had run out of softer places to fall. My mother must have mistaken my silence for hesitation, because her tone shifted, becoming just a little sharper. We're family, Naomi. That sentence did not pull me closer. It made something inside me go cold, because I had learned a long time ago that in my parents' mouths, family did not mean love without conditions. It meant obligation without accountability. Still, I did not hang up. Not yet. Because I wanted to hear how far she was willing to go without once saying the words she should have said 5 years earlier. I wanted to know whether she would ask for help like a mother reaching for her daughter, or like a woman who had finally realized the child she dismissed was the only adult in the room. And deep down, in a place I hated admitting still existed, I wanted to see whether any part of her understood the difference. She did not say she was sorry. Not that night. Not the next day. Not even after I agreed to look over their financial documents. That was the first thing I noticed when I went to see them. I told myself I was not going there for closure. I was not going there because I suddenly believed they had changed. I was going because I wanted facts. Because if they were going to drag me back into the gravity of that family, even for one afternoon, then this time I was going in with my eyes open. My parents' house looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, maybe, but emotionally. The front steps where I had once stood with cardboard boxes in my arms now looked worn and oddly ordinary. The living room where so many stories had been rewritten in my mother's favor looked less powerful without my fear inside it. Even the hallway to my old room felt narrower, like time had stripped the place of the authority it used to have over me. My mother greeted me at the door with the kind of stiff politeness people use at funerals and bad business meetings. My father stayed in the kitchen, shuffling papers with an expression that suggested this whole thing offended him, as if financial collapse had happened to him unfairly rather than through a long chain of choices he refused to correct. Caleb was there too, leaning against the counter, already looking bored. That irritated me more than I expected. He still carried himself like someone who assumed problems would eventually be solved by whichever woman in the room had the most discipline. I sat down at the dining table and started reviewing everything. Mortgage statements, credit card balances, late notices. A home equity line they had barely mentioned on the phone. 2 loans my father had meant to handle. A credit card in my mother's name that had been used for expenses that were so obviously unnecessary it almost made me laugh. Decor, hosting, gifts, restaurant charges. Even then, even while they were weeks from losing the house, my mother had still been spending money on the performance of stability. I went through every page slowly, asking questions, making notes, building a timeline in my head. Office management had taught me how to hear panic underneath vagueness, how to spot the line between confusion and avoidance. And what I saw sitting at that table was not just bad luck, it was denial. Months of it, maybe years. My father kept trying to interrupt with excuses. The market changed. Things got tight unexpectedly. It's not as bad as it looks. But the numbers did not care about his pride, and neither did I. At one point I looked up and said, "You were already behind before the second loan." He shifted in his seat. "It was temporary." "No," I said, tapping the page. "This was a pattern." The room went quiet. My mother hated that word. I could see it in her face. Pattern was dangerous in our family because patterns proved things were not accidents. Patterns turned isolated incidents into truth. Still, I kept going. I told them exactly what had to happen if they wanted to keep the house. Spending had to stop immediately. Certain accounts needed to be closed. A payment arrangement might still be possible, but only if they stopped pretending they could out-image the problem. I explained what I would say if I were the one calling the lender. I wrote down the order in which they needed to handle things. I made it simple enough that even my father's ego should not have been able to confuse it. And the whole time, neither of them said the words I had waited 5 years to hear. Not once. Then Sunday came. That was when my mother invited relatives over. She claimed it was for my grandmother's birthday lunch. But I knew what it really was the moment I walked in and saw half the family there. My Aunt Denise, my Uncle Rob, 2 cousins, my grandmother at the head of the table. Even Caleb had ironed a shirt, which told me someone had decided this gathering mattered. I should have left the second I understood. But I stayed. Maybe because I was tired of running from rooms where my story had been edited without my consent. Maybe because some part of me sensed the truth had finally been pushed into a corner and had nowhere left to go. Lunch had barely started before my mother made her move. She waited until plates were served and conversation softened, then sighed and said, "We're just so grateful Naomi finally decided to help. She's always been a little stubborn. But family is family in the end." There it was. A neat little sentence. Half praise, half correction. A way to make herself sound gracious while quietly reminding everyone that I had once been the problem. My Aunt Denise gave me a smile over her glass. "See? That's what I said all those years ago. Family comes through." All those years ago. The floor. My room. Their lie. Her little speech about how I should be grateful for a place to stay. I set my fork down very carefully. Something in my mother's face shifted. She saw it. She knew I was done being manageable. I looked around the table, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel small in front of any of them. Then I said, calmly, "That's interesting, because 5 years ago this family had a lot to say when my parents gave my bedroom to guests, made me sleep on the floor, and told everyone I was ungrateful for being hurt." The room froze. No one moved. No one even reached for a glass. My grandmother blinked first. "Naomi." But I did not stop. I had spent too many years letting other people decide when the truth was inconvenient. "I didn't make a scene," I said. "I didn't scream. I didn't insult anyone. I asked where I was supposed to sleep after my room had already been given away, and the answer was the floor." Then the next morning, instead of admitting that was cruel, Mom told relatives I was dramatic. My mother's mouth opened. "That is not what happened." I turned to her. "Really?" I asked. "So I imagined Aunt Denise telling me I should be grateful to have a place to stay?" Aunt Denise's face changed instantly. Not to guilt exactly. More like the discomfort of someone hearing her own words repeated in a room where they suddenly sounded uglier than she remembered. "I didn't mean it like that," she said weakly. "I know," I replied. "That was the problem. None of you meant it. You just accepted their version because it was easier than asking what actually happened." My father's voice came in hard. "This is not the time!" And for the first time, that line had no power over me. "No," I said. "This is exactly the time, because I am not going to sit here and let the same people who humiliated me rewrite me as difficult now that they need something from me." My mother went pale. "We invited you here because we're trying to heal as a family." I almost smiled. "No," I said again, softer this time, but sharper. You invited me here because you wanted to perform reconciliation in front of witnesses without ever telling the truth. No one defended her. That was the moment I knew the story had broken open. Not because everyone suddenly became noble, not because they finally understood every detail, but because for once, my mother could not control the room fast enough to reshape what was happening. The facts were too plain. My voice was too steady, and the need that had brought them back to me had already exposed more than they realized. I reached into my bag and pulled out the notes I had made from their bills. Then I slid them across the table toward my father. I came because you said you needed help keeping the house. I said, I gave you the plan. I did my part. But do not stand in front of relatives and act like I came running because family suddenly mattered to me the way it should have mattered to you when I was sleeping on hardwood floors in this house. My grandmother looked at my mother with an expression I had never seen before. Not outrage, not exactly. Just disappointment that had finally found solid ground. And my mother, for once in her life, had nothing polished enough to hide behind. Nobody at that table came to my defense fast enough to feel heroic. That is one of the hardest truths I have learned about family. When a lie benefits the emotional comfort of a whole room, the truth usually enters alone. But once it enters, people hear it differently when the person speaking is no longer begging to be believed. That was the difference now. At 24, I had still been trying to prove that I deserved basic respect. At 29, I was not asking for permission to describe what happened to me. I was simply refusing to participate in the lie anymore. My father looked down at the papers I had pushed toward him, then back up at me with that same hard expression he used whenever reality insulted his pride. So that's what this is? He asked. You've been waiting all these years to punish us? There it was. The final refuge of people who never want to admit they caused pain. If you tell the truth too early, you are dramatic. If you tell it too late, you are vindictive. Either way, they try to turn your voice into the crime. I met his stare and said, No. If I wanted to punish you, I would have let you lose the house without saying a word. That landed, not loudly, but deeply. Because everyone at that table knew it was true. I had shown up. I had gone through the paperwork. I had built a plan. I had done the practical, adult, unglamorous work of trying to keep a roof over the heads of two people who once treated my place under that roof as optional. That was not revenge. That was restraint. My mother finally spoke, but the force had gone out of her voice. We made mistakes. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the phrase was so carefully chosen. Mistakes. A gentle word. A word people use when they miss an exit or overcook dinner. Not when they teach their daughter, over and over, that her comfort is negotiable and her pain is a public relations problem. You made a pattern, I said quietly. The room stayed silent. I kept my eyes on my mother because for years she had been the one who needed witnesses, needed atmosphere, needed tone to do what honesty could not. But stripped of all that, with relatives sitting there and no clean way to interrupt me without looking worse, she looked smaller than I had ever seen her. You did not just give my room away, I said. You made me feel like I had no right to take up space in my own home. Then you told people I was ungrateful so you would not have to feel ashamed. That changed something in me. It changed the way I saw this family. It changed the way I saw myself. My grandmother lowered her eyes. My Aunt Denise looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Caleb, for once, had nothing clever to say. My father exhaled sharply through his nose. So what now? You want an apology? It should not have sounded like an accusation, but in his mouth it did. As if wanting acknowledgement after years of humiliation was one more unreasonable demand. And that was when I understood something with absolute clarity. I did not need them to finally become the parents I should have had. I needed boundaries strong enough that it no longer mattered whether they ever did. So I answered him honestly. No, I said. Not the kind you'd give me. My mother's face tightened, because she knew exactly what I meant. I did not want one of those apologies that come wrapped in excuses. Not, we did our best. Not, you were difficult too. Not, we're sorry you felt that way. Not, that was a long time ago. I had spent too much of my life surviving on crumbs to confuse them with a meal. I stood up from the table and picked up my bag. I will help with the lender, I said. I'll send the contact information, the payment order, and the list of what needs to be closed by Tuesday. After that, what happens is up to you. My mother stared at me. You're just leaving? I looked at her and realized that, even now, she still expected me to stay in the room long enough for her comfort to recover. Yes, I said. Because helping you fix a financial crisis is not the same thing as pretending none of this happened. Her voice cracked then, just slightly. We're your parents. I believe she meant that as a final card, something sacred, something unquestionable. But all I could hear was the echo of another sentence from years ago. Be grateful. Stop making everything dramatic. It's only the floor. At least you have a place to stay. So I answered the only way I could. And I was your daughter, I said. That was the sentence that finally broke the room. Not with shouting, not with theatrics, just with truth. Because everyone there understood what sat inside it. The accusation, the grief, the years. The simple fact that being my parents had come with responsibilities they had treated like inconveniences whenever I needed something from them more serious than food or shelter. They had given me survival and called it love. They had demanded gratitude where they should have offered care. I left before anyone could stop me. Outside, the air felt cooler than I expected. I walked to my car with steady hands, but once I was inside and the door shut behind me, I sat there for a full minute without starting the engine, not crying, not shaking, just breathing. Because the strangest part of finally telling the truth is that it does not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it feels quiet. Sometimes it feels like setting down a weight you got so used to carrying that you forgot it was crushing you. I did send the lender information on Tuesday. I sent the budget notes too. I did exactly what I said I would do. No more and no less. My parents kept the house for a while longer, though not without making changes they should have made years earlier. Whether they truly learned anything, I cannot tell you. People who spend a lifetime protecting their pride do not transform overnight just because the truth embarrassed them at lunch. My mother texted me twice after that. The first said, "I wish you hadn't done that in front of everyone." The second said, "You could have handled it with more grace." I did not answer either one, because grace had never been the problem. I had spent years being graceful while they stepped over my dignity. I had smiled, adjusted, helped, softened, excused, and endured. Grace was what nearly destroyed me when I used it to make other people comfortable at my own expense. What saved me was something else. A locked apartment door with my name on the lease. A bed no one could volunteer. A paycheck I earned myself. A life built without asking anyone whether I deserved space inside it. That is what I have now. Not a perfect family. Not some fake movie ending where everyone cries, apologizes, and suddenly becomes safe. Something better. Perspective, distance, standards. Peace that does not require my humiliation to survive. The deepest wound was never really the floor. It was being taught that I was supposed to thank people for hurting me as long as they called it family. The healing began when I stopped believing that lie. And now, in my home, no one gives away my room. No one rewrites my pain. No one tells me to sleep on the floor and call it gratitude, because I do not live there anymore. And more importantly, I do not live by their version of me anymore.